Greetings. Back in April of 2020, Vocab Malone and I explored the topic of online discussions about the markings on the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. And about halfway through that conversation, there was a brief look at a comment which our beloved friend, the good doctor, Kelly Richardson, had made about Yiddish. He had made it in a Facebook post back in 2017. And I think that comment can provide a good start for this video. So I'd like to play this clip for you now. It's a clip of Vocab, like I said, Vocab reading a comment from our good friend, the good doctor, back in 2017. And we'll pick this up just before the 1 hour, 3 minute mark of the show. And this clip will run for slightly over 2 minutes.
He links to a video from the 700 Club, and he's speaking to his supporters here. Giant Israel, I'm sure you're aware the modern Hebrew, Yiddish, was formulated. I'm sure you're aware of how Yiddish evolved. Understand Yiddish is the language of the Jews as we know them, of Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus. The languages consist of different components: Hebrew, German, Slavic, Romance, but German is the primary one. You are aware that Yiddish is written in Semitic characters, and it's not ancient or paleo. Where did Eliezer ben Yehuda get his words from? I can prove to you that Moses wouldn't be able to understand this so-called modern Hebrew. Yes, I can read modern Hebrew. Am I a scholar? Not at all, but I can give you the facts in English and explaining the insertion of the nikud and metras lectionis insertions into a language that didn't need them, which completely changed the original pronunciations of the original text. Not a single Hebrew scholar can read the cursive Hebrew our ancestors wrote in the church I made mention. This is just so bad, but help us out, Abu. Explain to the people why this is so bad.
Well, first off, the reasoning shows that he's fully embraced the logic of Lashon Kodash. That's clear, and I was hoping I could have a discussion with him on that, but as I said, no, I can't. He's blocked me. But nonetheless, here's something interesting. For him to correctly now. Again, modern Israeli Hebrew is not Yiddish, but he is correct that Yiddish is a non-Semitic language which employs a Semitic script. It's funny that in this case, he understands that you can look at a text using Hebrew characters, and that doesn't mean that it's the Hebrew language. He understands that here when he's critiquing Yiddish and attempting to put a critique of Yiddish onto modern Israeli Hebrew, but somehow he forgets that simple rule when trying to argue that some markings on the pews sort of resemble a Hebrew character, therefore the Hebrew language is present.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to show you that because it touches on a point which sets the tone for this video. As I've discussed in previous videos, languages like Hebrew or Jewish Aramaic or Yiddish, among others, including Ladino or Judeo-Arabic, all these languages have been written in what is now the standard Hebrew script, also known as the Ashuri script or the square script. Therefore, if one is looking at a set of markings which one perceives to be apparent Hebrew characters, merely pointing to the alleged script would not tell you which, if any, of those languages is present, right? Each of those languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish, Ladino, Judeo-Arabic, right? Each language has its own distinctive features, which, you need to look into those features and point to those features in order to reveal which language is present, if there's any language, in a set of markings which are perceived to be apparent Hebrew characters, right? So with that in mind, I'd like to ask this question, and I ask this hypothetically, perhaps you could even say playfully. Is there Yiddish on the pews? Now, I realize that some might find that to be a humorous question, and others might find it to be a provocative question, and yes, I recognize that still others might find it to be an absurd question. So let me begin with the disclaimer that I am not seriously suggesting that there is Yiddish on the pews. Rather, this is intended as a methodological question, as part of a thought experiment designed to help people think more seriously about their methodology for interpreting the markings on the pews. So let's consider an example of why this question is important. interesting. You see, back in March of 2021, the We Woke Now channel aired a video titled The Spirit of Benita Butrell. And towards the end of that show, the narrator very quickly raced through some secret scholars, some messages which were attributed to secret scholars. And these scholars were depicted as confirming the narrator's position on the pews. And I want to play an 11-second excerpt in which a secret scholar is quoted as saying that he sees something resembling a series of Hebrew cursive characters. Now, as you watch this, keep in mind that the reason this clip is only 11 seconds long is because our friend over at We Woke Now only devoted 11 seconds to this portion, right? So he went through this really quickly. He went through it quite quickly. But whatever the case, this clip picks up at about the 48-minute, 36-second mark. And here's the clip.
This is the quote from Professor Shaw from the Department of Islamic Studies. The letters look like a sequence of signs resembling a Hebrew cursive script.
And that was it. And nonetheless, despite how short that was, I bet some found that tantalizing, right? You know, perhaps it struck some as evidence of Hebrew on the pews. But honestly, there wasn't much to work with there, right? It's a decontextualized excerpt from a longer email, you know, again, from some secret scholar. Nonetheless, I'd like to ask you to consider the statement as it was presented and maybe think about the impression it gives you, right? Does it feel like he has a secret scholar saying there's Hebrew on the pews, right? Do you get that impression from that little excerpt? Well, with that in mind, let's switch over to an excerpt from another video on that same channel, on the We Woke Now channel. You see, 10 months later, in January of this year, 2022, our friend over at that channel put up a video titled CRAFTY COUNSEL, Blatant Liars 4, Don't Need Fake Scholars. And in that video, he returned to that email, which we just saw an excerpt from, right? This email from some secret scholar. But this time, he showed a great deal more of the email. Perhaps it could be said he showed the entire email. I'm not sure. But as you watch this next clip, recall what impression the previous clip gave you. And then let's think about how it looks with more context, right? So this clip is going to pick up slightly after the 1 hour, 44-minute mark, and it's going to run for slightly under 2 minutes. Here we go. Fair use.
Here, this is another professor. Right? Yeah, they see Hebrew University, Jerusalem. I thought I took that out. But notice what this professor says, right? And this is as the emails were still trickling in. I cannot decipher the scratchings on the furniture of the church with any confidence. I can only offer a single suggestion for reading the sequence of letters in the first image you sent me. I can be, and that's the main pew that was in question. It can be read hypothetically in modern Hebrew cursive script. This script was in use already in the medieval period. He goes on to say, this can be rendered into an English, not Hebrew text as any one of the following. So he was just giving some analogies of what it could possibly be, right? But notice what he says here, etc. As you notice, the letters look like a sequence of signs resembling cursive Hebrew script, but they appear to convey an English expression.
Oh my goodness!
This is a Hebrew linguist who is like one of the top in the world.
In Arabic, Aramaic,
in Arabic, yeah. He puts here, as you notice, the letters look like a sequence of signs resembling Hebrew cursive script, but they appear to convey an English expression. I do not insist that this is the correct reading. It is at most a remote hypothesis. I cannot apply a similar guess to any of the other pieces of writing that you sent me.
Okay, and we'll stop that there. Now, I want to ask you to think about what was just shown on the screen and what you just heard. So here are the different portions of the email they showed, but I simply just put those different portions together. And now we have more context from this mysterious secret scholar. First, on a minor note, he said that he could not decipher the markings with any confidence. Okay. Then it's worth noting that he was merely offering a hypothetical suggestion. But notice that he made clear that he did not think it was Hebrew. He wrote "not Hebrew" with an exclamation point. As for what he did suggest, he made clear that he was not insisting that it was correct. Rather, he presented it as just a guess and at most a remote hypothesis. Nonetheless, the best that he could come up with was that it might be English, not Hebrew. Remember that 11-second clip from 10 months prior? Remember how that made it seem. But now, think about how it looks with this fuller context. What we realize is that their own scholar, whoever he is saying that he did not see any discernible Hebrew in the markings they sent him. And instead, he suggested that at best, there's perhaps a remote possibility that it could be English in cursive Hebrew characters. Now, again, he was only sharing that as a remote possibility. But recalling the topic of this video, I'd like to ask you this question. What is Yiddish, right? More specifically, what is written Yiddish? Think about that. As Kelly himself correctly noted in that comment, which you heard Vocab read earlier, this comment that Kelly put on Facebook back in 2017, Yiddish is primarily German with some Slavic elements, and it's written in the Hebrew script. Now think about that. Let's treat Yiddish as basically German written in Hebrew characters. Dr. Kelly was triumphantly promoting a secret scholar, hesitantly proposing that the markings might be English written in Hebrew characters. Doesn't it seem like what's being proposed, if taken seriously, starts to approach something like Yiddish? And by the way, note that in that very comment from our friend, from Dr. Kelly, he was responding to a person who was going by the name James Israel. And I mention that because, ironically, in that thread, in the comment Kelly was responding to, that gentleman, James Israel, himself likened Yiddish to English. And honestly, it's a fair comparison as they're both Germanic languages. Now, I imagine that if we asked our right honorable friend, Dr. Kelly, if Yiddish appears on the pews, he would confidently say no, right? He'd probably wave that off. But he himself showed an email from some secret scholar stating that he does not think Hebrew appears on the pews, but offered the lighthearted suggestion that maybe there's a certain Germanic language written in Hebrew characters. Now, admittedly, in this case, the relevant Germanic language is English rather than German, but the fact remains that one of the good doctor's celebrated emails from a secret scholar suggested something more akin to Yiddish than Hebrew. He suggested a Germanic language written in Hebrew characters, as a remote possibility, admittedly. Now, aside from that email, the good doctor's one other ace of diamonds, as he might call it, has been his proposal that the text might read Yisrael, right, which is this completely ahistorical string of characters, which, according to our right honorable friend, means Israel. Yet it's spelled, according to him, with 5 yods and a zayin, yet no sin or aleph, right? So just a completely different spelling from how Israel is actually spelled in Hebrew characters, right? Now, there is no Hebrew text which employs that string of characters, which is why I've repeatedly called it an ahistorical string of characters. Nor, for that matter, is there any Yiddish text that spells it that way. But at this point, at least as part of an attempt to spark some deeper thought on methodology, perhaps we can ask this question. Even if we accepted, for the sake of argument, that string of characters was intended by whomever those markings were made by, even if we accepted that idea, right, for the sake of argument, is that Hebrew or Yiddish, or perhaps some other language? Now, again, I'm not seriously suggesting that Yiddish appears on the pews. I personally remain skeptical that any languages, appear on any of these pews. I mean, let's put it this way. As I've said before, I think this is likely a case of the human mind seeing similarities to characters from various scripts, and with there not actually being any discernible language therein, right? I, for one, remain skeptical. But it's still worth asking that question that I just asked, right? It's still worth asking if that might be Yiddish, at least as part of a thought experiment. And here's the reason why. The proposed readings are so vague and incoherent that even if, for the sake of argument, they were taken seriously, they lack any features which might enable one to distinguish them as Hebrew rather than Yiddish. And that is huge. Even when they put their best foot forward, and even if we take their suggestions seriously, there is still nothing that is discernible as coherent Hebrew. After all these years, their best proposals do not constitute obvious Hebrew. And I'm sorry, but that provides ground for considerable skepticism regarding the claim that Hebrew appears on the pews. Now, I could close this video here, but there is one more layer of irony which I would like to point out. And before I get to it, however, I want to reiterate that, as I've already said multiple times in this video, I am emphatically not seriously suggesting that Yiddish actually appears on the pews, right? Let me say that again. I am not claiming that Yiddish actually appears on the pews. But if we are to continue with this thought experiment, right, there would be one question that should be asked. And that question would be, how could Yiddish even wind up on the pews in the first place, right? If one were to suggest that Yiddish appears on the pews, how would they get there, right? Like, surely you're not suggesting that there were people speaking Yiddish in West Africa, are you, right? Now, the answer to that would be no, right? And more importantly, one does not have to suggest that anyone in West Africa spoke Yiddish, right? And here, too, there's a methodological point to be made. So with that in mind, I'd like to play a clip from Alvin Elmore's 2018 documentary titled Cryptic Quest, which is actually about the markings on the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah. You see, in that documentary, there's an interview with the local Savannah historian, Karen Wortham, who actually has ties to First African Baptist Church. And Miss Wortham mentions that there was a descendant of a prominent Ashkenazi family attending the church. So let me first play a clip of her discussing that person, right? So this first clip will run just under a minute, and permit me to say fair use.
Here we go now. I find out that there is a member of First African Baptist Church. His name is Jackson Benjamin Shefthal. Now, the Sheftals are some of the richest Jewish people. They're from the Jewish family. Jackson Benjamin is the son of Benjamin Shefthal. Also, he's the grandson of Mordecai Shefthal. Mordecai Shefthal is the person responsible for really the building and putting the strength together of the Jewish temple, which is Mikvah Israel in Savannah, Georgia. His mother, Mariah, is a free black woman at this time. She never marries Benjamin Shefthal, but Jackson Benjamin is raised basically as a little Jewish boy because he takes on this name. But when he becomes a grown man, now he is found to be on the roll of First African Baptist Church.
Okay, so you got that so far, right? There was a person attending the church who was a descendant of Mordecai Shefthal, who was a prominent Ashkenazi gentleman living in Savannah. Now, I'm going to play one more clip from the documentary, and listen closely as this local historian from Savannah, Karen Wortham, who has connections to the church, listen closely to how she states that she thinks a person who possessed the knowledge to make the relevant markings on the pews had to be someone like this descendant of Mordecai Shefthal, or Benjamin Shefthal, whomever, this descendant of the Ashkenazi Sheftals, right? So this next clip will run for about 43 seconds, and again, fair use.
The pews are in the balcony. They are made into the balcony. Many people did not even go in the balcony. And when you read into the history of the balcony and slavery, whites did not go into no balcony. So if there was any slaves that had the knowledge of reading, they were illiterate, that was one of the biggest kept secrets that you would have found on a plantation or among the slaves. They kept that as a secret. So someone who actually had the knowledge and was given the ability to learn this language, write this language, had to be someone like Jackson Benjamin Shefthal.
Now, I'm not the one who said that, right? That was a local historian in Savannah, Karen Wortham, who said that. Now, I personally do not think that we need to invoke some descendant of a prominent Ashkenazi Jew to explain the markings, as I honestly remain skeptical that there's any coherent language in those markings. Right? Honestly, I don't think there's Hebrew or Yiddish or Aramaic in those markings, right? But putting my skepticism aside, nonetheless, it is interesting that if we were to seriously entertain the idea of Yiddish on the pews, you have a local historian proposing that a likely explanation for the markings would be a member of the church who descends from Ashkenazim. Think how those points fit together. And this also got mentioned in passing when Benayah Israel appeared on Sista E's channel back in April of 2021 in the video you see on your screen. And I'm just going to play a couple of quick clips where that was alluded to, and the combined footage here will run for about 50 seconds, right? So here we go. And again, fair use.
While even the Ashkenazi brothers that are out there listening, I want to show you that even you have some stake in this church. Even you owe it to your forefathers to defend what the forefathers said they were, venerable fathers in Israel, right? So let's go through it. So Benjamin Shefthal was one of the brews that was on the first ship, Ashkenazi brew, right? Now this is what you're looking at on your screen is the First African Baptist Church, and you're looking at the deacons of the First African Baptist Church. And if you notice, there was a deacon named Shefthal. I'm gonna let that marinate for a while.
At the church.
A deacon of the church. not at the church, of the church.
Of the church named Sheftall.
Sheftall, and he is related to Benjamin Sheftall. He's a great grandson of Benjamin Sheftall, the first.
So at least one descendant of local Ashkenazim, and with these different names, maybe more than one, but at least one local descendant of Ashkenazim served as a deacon at the church. And now I want to show one final clip, right? This is from an interview with Karen Wortham on the Boom Church panel, and this aired back in January of this year, of 2022. Now, Miss Wortham is literally asked if there is a connection between the Sheftalls, between those prominent Ashkenazi Jews in Savannah, between the Sheftalls and the markings on the pews. So let's listen to what Miss Wortham says in this clip. And this clip will run for about a minute and a half. Fair use.
What is the connection between, I think, Benjamin Sheftall, the church, and the Hebrew writing on the pews?
The only connection I found between Mikvah Israel, which was organized by a gentleman named Mordecai Sheftall, and First African Baptist. Well, Mordecai Sheftall had a grandson named Benjamin Sheftall. Benjamin Sheftall, after the death of his first wife and child, because she died in childbirth, both of them did, he ended up being kind of like smitten, that's what I'm going to use, smitten with a young lady from First African. Her name was Mariah. And Mariah at that time she had jumped the broom with a gentleman by the name of Oliver. Well, Oliver happened to have still been a slave, but Mariah was a free woman. But in order to get Mariah in order for Benjamin to get Mariah in his house, he ended up purchasing Oliver. When Oliver came, Oliver was positioned outside the house, Mariah was in the house. Mariah ended up getting pregnant. When she was pregnant, she was pregnant from Benjamin. She ended up with a child by the name of Jackson Benjamin Sheftall. The Jewish community did not want the mulatto child to be named in the Sheftall name, but Benjamin Sheftall refused to listen to them. He named the young man Jackson Benjamin Sheftall, him being one of the wealthiest mulattoes in the city of Savannah.
Wow. Okay, so there you have it. Now, I'll leave that for each viewer to make sense of, right, to reach their own conclusions, their own interpretations. But at this point, before closing this video, I would like to summarize what we have covered so far. You see, first, Kellyanne Brown promoted an email from a secret scholar who said that he did not think Hebrew appeared in the markings, but he was open to the remote possibility that maybe one pew had English written in Hebrew characters. Second, note that English is a Germanic language, and thus English written in Hebrew characters would be closer to Yiddish than to Hebrew. Third, note that Kelly's most celebrated proposed reading so far is so vague and so incoherent that even if one were to take it seriously, it lacks any features necessary to distinguish the language as specifically Hebrew rather than Yiddish. And finally, fourth, note that even proponents of the claim that language appears on the pews, including a local Savannah historian with ties to the First African Baptist Church, note that even they note that there was at least one descendant of local Ashkenazim attending the church. And that person is even cited as a likely explanation for the markings on the pews. Now, again, as I said multiple times before, I emphatically do not think Yiddish actually appears on the pews, right? I remain skeptical that there's any discernible language on the pews, whether it be Yiddish or Hebrew or Arabic, right? But the point of this video is to offer a thought experiment to help viewers think a bit more critically about the methodologies they employ for interpreting the pews or interpreting the markings on the pews, right? You see, there are no grounds to seriously conclude that Hebrew appears on the pews, and even a hypothetical case for Yiddish on the pews is about as plausible as the case for Hebrew on the pews. And I hope those who have watched this video can appreciate why some of us are so skeptical. And with that, I'll close this video here. As always, I welcome the comments, questions, and even criticisms of others. As I've said many times, I do not censor comments here, so feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative. And God bless.
Apologists make dubious claims about textual, linguistic, historical, and archaeological elements. Christian apologists who are now looking into this are going to challenge them. It'll be kind of like little by little, one by one, because there's a whole backlog of claims they've been making that have went unchallenged.
There's that wrong, and now I'm gonna tell y'all right now, y'all ain't gonna just get out here and say what y'all want to say without being challenged. I don't know who y'all think y'all are, but nobody gonna do it. If y'all been blowing at the church all this time, anything you say publicly could be challenged now. Listen, this is just the way it is. Nobody gonna adjust because that word Israel is in that Bible and y'all done had a revelation. Nobody gonna do that. You know, y'all can say what y'all want. This is just not how, this is the welcome to the real world. But I'm just telling y'all, this is how it's going, because people making it sound like, yo, they really on some soft stuff, like they don't want that work. And I've been telling y'all, now we've been saying that, but now that the stuff is getting dealt with, don't start crying about that other stuff. Oh, well, I had a flight I couldn't get on. No. You put information out from 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. Now people catching up to that information. We told y'all other people coming out because y'all making bold claims. There's some stuff that I know that y'all don't know. Oh, there's work available for y'all. And these folk want to get y'all that work. Y'all got to get it. And y'all got to come forth. No crying. No running to the police. Let's get the work on. Y'all get out here. Y'all say A, B, C, and D. All right, whatever we're going to do. All right. But nobody is going to stop or pull back work. Who started asking who to pull back videos? Nobody gonna be pulling back videos and all this every time you offended when them other dudes been running a whole month.